welcome back to When Women Walked. As always, I'm your host, Madison. And today, like I mentioned last episode, I am so excited. The story that I'm going to tell you today is just one of those stories that sounds like it really couldn't possibly be real, like someone made this up for a movie. But then you look it up and you realize, oh my gosh, no, this actually happened. And somehow I hadn't, and I mean, hopefully some of you have heard about it, but I don't know that it's a very well-known story. So with that, I would like to just dive right in. As always, I hope you find yourself in a safe and comfortable space. You are so welcome here, and I'm so excited to be here in this episode talking to you. So just to recap, last episode we talked about the Haitian Revolution, about 500,000 people who were told they were property, and they pushed back and said absolutely not. So today we are traveling pretty far from Haiti. We're going to the other side of the world. We're going to the South China Sea in the early 1800s. And we're going to talk about a woman named Ching Shih. Ching Shih commanded the largest pirate fleet in recorded history. 80,000 sailors, or pirates, but 80,000, 1,800 ships. She created laws, she controlled trade routes, she made the Portuguese, the British Navy, and the Chinese imperial government all try and all fail to stop her. And then when she was done, the most shocking part, she negotiated her own retirement on her terms. She literally keeps everything she walks away free. So history might have given you pirates, but it just forgot to tell you the most powerful one was a woman. So let's get into it. Where did it all start? So Ching Shih was born around 1775 in the Guangdong province of China. We don't know her actual birth name. History, missed the record on that, if there ever was a record. It's not, yeah, they didn't keep records like we do now, birth certificates, things like that. But what we do know is that she worked on a floating brothel, also called a flower boat, in the port of Canton. So these were very common in 18th century China. Boats moored in the harbor where women were brought and sold for the entertainment of sailors and merchants. And this is where Ching Shih's story begins. Not with privilege, not with connections, not with anything the world would have necessarily called an advantage. And I want you to hold on to that, because what she builds from this starting point is just incomprehensible. So, in 1801, a pirate commander named Zhang Yi comes to Canton. He was already very powerful, commanding a significant fleet in the South China Sea, and he decides he wants to marry Ching Shih. So there are different accounts of how this actually went. Some accounts say that she negotiated this marriage. Some say she demanded equal partnership as a condition of the marriage. But regardless, what we do know for certain is that Zhang Yi agreed, and that from the moment of their marriage, Ching Shih was not just a pirate's wife, right? She was his co-commander. She ran the finances. She managed the alliances. She understood the politics of the South China Sea in a way that would prove very quickly to be extraordinary. And so together, they will build the Red Flag Fleet. Yeah, say that 10 times fast. The Red Flag Fleet. One of the most powerful pirate confederacies in history. And by 1804, they were commanding over 1,800 ships and tens of thousands of sailors. But then 3 years later, Zhang Yi, her husband, would die in a typhoon. And Ching Shih does something that no one really expected. She takes command. right? She doesn't just sit there and mourn, and now what is she to do? No. She takes command of this fleet. Not quietly, not reluctantly. She moved immediately, decisively, and with complete authority. She secured the loyalty of Zhang Yi's adoptive son, a man named Zhang Bao, made him her second in command, and consolidated control of the entire fleet. So within months, the Red Flag Fleet was hers. And guess what? She was just getting started. So here's what most people don't understand about her. She wasn't just powerful. She was also brilliant. Strategically, politically, organizationally, economically, she was operating at a level that most military commanders in history never could dream of reaching. Right? So the first thing she does after taking command was create a code of laws for the entire fleet. So think about what that actually means. 80,000 sailors from different backgrounds, different loyalties, different motivations, and all of them armed. Yes, all of them dangerous. And she looked at that and said, yeah, we need some rules. So her code was strict and it was enforced. Any sailor who gave orders without authorization, executed. Any sailor who stole from a village the fleet had already taxed, executed. Any sailor who deserted or went absent without permission, you can probably guess, executed. Or a little bit more lenient, let's just cut off his ears for a warning, right? Yeah. But here's what makes her code different from just straight brutality. It also protected people. So female captives who were taken in raids were not to be harmed. If a sailor wanted to marry a captive woman, she had to also consent. And if he took her as a wife, he had to be faithful to her. So we're back in the 1800s and consent was a thing, right? And captives who were not considered beautiful, it's the code's words, not mine, but captives who were not deemed beautiful were to be released unharmed. And this wasn't just morality, this was strategy. Ching Shih understood that a fleet that terrorized indiscriminately would create endless enemies. A fleet that operated by rules, even some kind of brutal ones, could build something sustainable. And what does she do? She builds something very sustainable. The Red Flag Fleet didn't just raid, it taxed. Coastal villages paid regular tribute in exchange for protection. Okay? Merchants paid to sail through her waters unmolested. She was literally running an economy. So her fleet controlled the Pearl River Delta. And this was the entire waterway network connecting Canton, the most important trading port in China, to the South China Sea. So let's say that again. She was controlling the waterway that would connect the most important trading port in China to the South China Sea. So salt traders, fishing fleets, merchant ships, they all had to pay her, right? So the Qing dynasty, Qing, not her name, but the Qing dynasty, the imperial government of China, just tried to ignore her. They were thinking, oh, eventually she'll go away, she'll move on, she'll die, whatever. Didn't work. So then they tried to suppress her. Their naval forces engaged the Red Flag Fleet multiple times. And you know what happened? They lost every time. So by 1809, the Red Flag Fleet was so powerful that the Chinese government couldn't move goods through its own coastal waters without her permission. Let's back it up. The Chinese government could not move goods through their own waters without Ching Shih's permission. She had effectively become a parallel government to the South China Sea. So now we get to the part that still just blows my mind every time I think about it. 3 of the most powerful forces in the early 19th century would decide they were going to stop her. 3 of them, okay? Not just one, but let's start with the Chinese Imperial Navy. So, 1808, Qing dynasty again, assembled a major naval force to destroy the Red Flag Fleet. Admiral Kuo Lang led the operation with what was by any measure a significant armada. And Ching Shih defeats them so thoroughly that Admiral Kuo Lang, reportedly drowned himself in shame after the battle. The Chinese government will try again in 1809 with an even larger force under a different commander. So the result was the same, though. Ching Shih also, though, captures over 60 of their ships and incorporates them into her own fleet. So she didn't just defeat them, but let's add salt to the wound, and also, I'm going to take your ships, right? She took their ships, 60 of them. Not a small number. So next, let's look at Portugal. So the Portuguese had significant naval presence in the South China Sea. They controlled Macau, one of the most important trading ports in the region. Ching Shih's fleet threatened Portuguese merchant shipping constantly. So the Portuguese sent warships, and the result was not what they had hoped for. Ching Shih's forces outmaneuvered them, captured several vessels, and forced the Portuguese to retreat. So Portugal, a colonial empire that had been terrorizing coastlines across Africa, Asia, and the Americas for 3 centuries, was outmatched by a woman from a flower boat in Canton. Let that sit for a moment. And then let's move on to Britain. So the British East India Company was the dominant commercial power in Asia. They had warships, they had resources, they had every reason to believe they could handle one pirate fleet. So they engaged Ching Shih's forces in the South China Sea, and they lost. So like in my last episode, Britain is still struggling. So British naval officers filed reports back to London describing the Red Flag Fleet's tactics as unlike anything they had encountered. Her commanders, trained under her code, operating in waters they knew intimately, outfought the British Navy. Not a British Navy, the British Navy. So by late 1809, all 3 imperial powers had been defeated, and the South China Sea belonged to Ching Shih. 80,000 sailors, 1,860 warships, because of the 60 she takes from China, but 3 empires, all of them beaten. So what do these empires do? They send diplomats. So in early 1810, the Qing dynasty made a decision that will honestly tell you everything you need to know about how powerful Ching Shih had become. The Qing dynasty will offer peace, not surrender, right? Peace, a negotiated settlement with a former sex worker who had started with nothing and built the largest pirate fleet in history. The government's offer was generous, or at least they thought so. Amnesty for the fleet. The sailors could keep their ships and become fishermen or traders. Ching Shih herself would receive a title and a pension. So what do you think she does? She looks at that offer and she goes, yeah, we're going to renegotiate this. So she goes to the table herself. Reportedly, she attends the negotiations in person, which was almost unheard of. And she didn't just accept what was offered, she pushed. And the final terms, they're extraordinary. Chef's kiss, if I may. Her sailors could keep their weapons, keep their ships. Many received positions in the Imperial Navy or the government, paid positions, right, with rank. Her second in command, Zhang Bao, if you remember her husband's adopted son, received a military commission as a lieutenant. Ching Shih, what happened to her, right? She keeps her wealth, all of it, literally all of it. She was allowed to keep operating gambling houses and other businesses as well. So she literally retires with everything she had built. Nothing was confiscated. No one was executed. She walks away free, rich, and untouchable. So the Qing dynasty, the government of the most populous nation on earth, gave a former pirate everything she asked for because the alternative was fighting her again. And we know how that would have probably ended. So after the settlement, she'll move to the Guangdong province, if you remember where she was born, and ran a gambling house and possibly other businesses. So she lived for decades after retiring, dying around 1844 at approximately 69 years old. And so by the standards of her time and place, that was a long life. That was a full life. And a life she had built entirely on her own terms. Wealthy, free, unbothered. 3 words that should have been impossible for someone who started where she started. But she made them possible. So, why don't we know this story? Why isn't Ching Shih in every history textbook? Why isn't she as famous as Blackbeard or Sir Francis Drake or Captain Jack Sparrow? I'm kidding. We know he's fake. But anyways, or any of the other European pirates who commanded a fraction of what she commanded. So I would say part of it's geography, right? Western history education is deeply Eurocentric. If it didn't happen in Europe or to Europeans, it often doesn't make the cut. Part of it is gender. The word pirate often conjures a very specific image. Male, European, swashbuckling. So a woman who did it better than any of them really doesn't fit the narrative that was being written. And part of it is that the people who lost to her, right, the Portuguese, the British, the Chinese government, had every reason not to publicize their defeats. I mean, how embarrassing for them back in the 1800s. And especially Britain, you lost to America, you lost in Haiti. Come on, Britain, what are you doing? So you don't brag about being beaten by someone you've spent centuries insisting couldn't possibly beat you, right? So the story stayed small. Passed around among historians, occasionally cited in academic papers, but never given the full treatment it deserves. Until now, hopefully I did her story justice, because that is exactly what When Women Walked is for. Ching Shih started with nothing, less than nothing. I mean, she probably, if she hadn't married Zhang Yi and became his co-commander, would have died on the flower boat, the brothel ship, at a very young age. So she starts with nothing, less than nothing. Starts in a system designed to make sure she had no power, no options, and literally no future. But she looked at that system and she built something so powerful that 3 empires had to negotiate with her. So this is not just a story about pirates, as much as it is, and as much as I love that it is. But this is a story about what becomes possible when someone refuses to accept the limits that the world tries to put on them. She walked so we could stand where we are today. So, in case you couldn't tell, I was very excited to tell this story. Thank you so much for listening to Season 2, Episode 2. If this episode moved you, please share it. Send it to someone who might enjoy or just needs to hear this story that confounds our understanding, our narrative of pirates, right? Of empires. So, with that, next week is another exciting one. We're going to the Aztec Empire. And we're talking about a goddess who was so powerful that when the Spanish arrived, they had to steal her rituals and call them their own. Again, another empire recognizing the power, or I guess we're talking about 2 empires, sorry. The Spanish Empire recognizing the power of religion within the Aztec Empire, that they steal these rituals, try to hide it, and claim it as their own. But we're going to uncover it. So this story, I hope, will change what you think, or the way you think about what gets called sacred. So I will see you then. And in the meantime, stay curious, stay unbothered, and please never stop asking who they left out.